Congressman Ron Paul with us. And Congressman, I'm going to give you first the opportunity to launch a big I told you so, because most of this stuff you were warning us about all along.
Well, that is true, but nobody appreciates an individual who comes. I told you so. I told you so.
Yeah, but you'd like to do it,
Well, if you do it for me, then I'll gloat a little bit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think the record has been very clear, and I don't claim that I was all wise about it, but I watch Austrian economists and what they do and say, and I understand the Austrian economic theory. So you can make projections. You can't make projections of time. But if you print a lot of money, for instance, it loses value. So it's really not all that complex. So you can understand where financial bubbles come from. And if financial bubbles exist, they have to collapse. So it's not so much that we're all knowing as much as common sense tells us that you can't live on credit. You have to work for what we have, and if you want to increase wealth, you have to work and earn it and save money, and it doesn't come out of a printing press.
We're going to talk about the earmarks and that piece of it, but we have done so much of this stuff. We've got to do it rushed. We've got to do it in such a hurry. We can't read the bill before we vote on it. The president's not keeping up with his promises of transparency, of posting legislation for 5 days before he signs it. We're doing this stuff so rushed that nobody has a clue what's even in this legislation. We saw that with the TARP.
This is commonplace. This is how things operate in Washington, whether it's this economic crisis we have and the urgency, the end of the world will come if you don't pass this bill next week. The same thing happened, after 9/11 when there was an attack on our civil liberties. If you don't do this, they're going to blow up the world. Or invading Iraq, it's urgent, or you're going to get bombed by a nuclear weapon. So everything is urgency, and important legislation never gets read. It's popped on us within hours before we have to vote on it. And there's such a political clamor for it, and the members become frightened, and they say, you know what? If we don't do this and this, our people are going to be mad at us. They need to have this done. But this idea of urgency and blindly doing something and thrashing out is the way government operates, unfortunately.
It is jaw-dropping to watch the amount of money that's been spent in just the first 51 days of this administration, the amount of wealth that's been wiped off the map. Is there any way to even slow this down, Congressman? Because I know you and others are trying, but this train is going full speed right towards the cliff.
And I think we'll go over the cliff, and that means the dollar will be destroyed because the sentiment here is that if you bailed out Wall Street with hundreds of billions, and the Federal Reserve has gotten involved and passed out trillions, why not give everything you can to poor people? So the psychology here is there are no limits. And the dollar, people still buy dollars, we still use them, but this can't last. The dollar financial system has collapsed, and that's why a lot of people lost a lot of money. But you just can't keep bailing out the world system and keep it going by just creating more money. So we'll go over the cliff, and going over the cliff means the destruction of the dollar, and it goes quickly. The financial system seems to have shocked a lot of people that it collapsed so quickly, but that's the way it usually works. But the end of a currency comes quickly, too. It's very, very rapid. You can destroy it over a period of 20 or 30 years, but it might take 1 or 2 years for it finally to go completely. And that's what we're working on. I wished we had more help here and more common sense, but the political pressure is pretty great. People want to be taken care of. There's the idea that there's a safety net out there, and government has to act. And if you tell people what they need to do is start saving, and what government needs to do is less, and let people have, maybe we should get rid of the income tax and a few other things like that, and say go to work, save some money, and pay off your bills. Nope. The people want free food and free medical care. Just look, they're moving to socialized medicine in the midst of this crisis. They're talking about trillions of dollars for free medical care.
You mentioned healthcare. You mentioned medicine. Nobody wants to take the tough cure of saying, well, you got to work.
They've been conditioned rather well because for the last 20 years or so, basically capital came from the Federal Reserve. Capital is supposed to come from us working, living within our means. If we have money left over, we save it, and somebody else uses it, or you invest it yourself. But we have lived way beyond our means. We borrowed money and used it for consumption. There was actually zero savings. where did the money come? Well, the Fed would create it out of thin air, put it into the banking system, and people say, oh, that's capital. And therefore, they thought capital came with no strings attached, and it was for free. But it only lasts to a certain degree. You can fool the system for a while, but that all came to an end.
It seems dangerous to me in this new economic Obamonomics. We are actually punishing capital investment and risk taking at a time we need more of it than ever.
We tax it, and that's the punishment, and that's why it won't work like it's supposed to. But what about the whole idea of encouraging people to save? Well, if you have been frugal, and if you didn't extend yourself, and you didn't get involved in this mess in the stock market, what if you have a couple $100,000 in your CDs? What are you making, 1% or something? At the same time, if markets set the interest rates, they might be making 6 or 7 or 8%. So people are being cheated. It's a system that is very corrupting, very destructive, and reality is setting in. But I don't think there's enough understanding yet here in Washington because we continue to do the wrong thing.
You've mentioned, and we aired that clip just a few moments ago, that part of our problem, and this is not to be misunderstood, that you're suddenly somehow for earmarks and pork barrel spending, but you're for accountability. And that at least in the earmark process, we know where the money's going and where it can be spent. What we've seen in TARP, what we've seen in the stimulus package, particularly as these communities are now reselling their stimulus money, is we've got no accountability. And as bad as earmarks may be, they're better than a blank check.
Yeah, and I think I've come to the conclusion to defending earmarks in that sense isn't all that easy because earmarks has a stigma attached, and rightfully so, because they've been so abused. And if you vote against all the spending bills, of course, you vote against all earmarks. But the principle is, should Congress designate how each dollar be spent? And that is my position. So if you talk about designation, maybe it doesn't arouse this fear that you're being corrupted if you earmark something. But we should designate everything. And I think you mentioned earlier this whole idea that the TARP funds had no designations, and it went overseas. I mean, that's the derelict of duty by the members of Congress. So we need to, of course, earmark it or designate it rather than just giving it to the administration. And the one thing that people have to realize, if anybody votes against an earmark, nothing happens to the budget. That money is still spent.
Which is really the bigger problem. That's the bigger problem, is that we're going to spend this money no matter what. That's the mindset in Washington. Maybe we ought to spend less.
Yeah, well, that's the real solution. But people say, well, if you vote against the bridge in the United States, you know what? The bridge may be built in Iraq.
We'll just spend it somewhere else.
That doesn't solve our problem.
Have you got a few more minutes, Congressman?
Yes.
There's a difference in pork barrel spending and earmark spending. And Congressman Ron Paul of Texas with us as we're trying to sort this out.
Yeah, I think there are two things going on here. One is the spending, overall spending, and almost all of it, as far as I'm concerned, is unconstitutional or wasteful, and that's why I vote against all the appropriation bills. But the other one, this whole earmark and designation process, is who gets to decide where the money is spent. And my argument is the Congress should do that, so that's why I say if you're going to spend it, you should designate exactly where it's going rather than allowing the executive branch to make those decisions. Then they carry all the political clout, and then they wheel and deal with the member of Congress. It's sort of the line item veto, giving it to the executive branch, and if you don't do what they want and vote for their projects, then they won't allow some of the district, some of the money to go to your district, and I want the control to be in the Congress. But the truth is, most of it is sort of could be categorized as pork because, even in the highway system, technically, all the highway funds should be just left in those states, and the states pay for their own highways rather than coming up here and making a round trip. Education funds are the same way. Why make these round trips and then fight to get this money back? So that's why I just argue the case that the money should all be left at home. If it comes here, Congress has a responsibility to designate how it should be spent.
And that's the big problem with the stimulus plan. So much of it comes with so many strings attached. Last question, because I know you've got to run to an appointment. Is there any way to stop this and turn this tide before the 2010 elections? Or are we just going to have to hunker down and know that bad things are going to continue to come?
Well, in a way, we don't want it to end before then, because if we did, that means it's collapsed. We don't have the votes here to come to our senses and do the right thing, so I'm afraid it's going to end with a calamity, which is, a dollar collapse. So let's just hope that we limp along and educate a lot more people and get a few more members up here to make the correct decisions. Right now, all they think they have to do is spend more money, borrow more money, run up higher debt, and print more money. That's how we got into the trouble. It can't possibly be the solution.
Congressman Ron Paul, keep up the great work. Thanks for being with us, and we'll get you back again soon.